Hello and welcome back for another episode of this season of Try This on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen, and we're going to start this week off with what we always do, which is a training update. So last week was my last week of just like somewhat hard training. I was slightly recovering from the long weekend, big training weekend with my coach that we talked about in the previous episode. So it was a big week of just trying to get some more miles in on the bike, some more running, right before the taper starts, which is starting today. I get a rest day, which is really exciting. I'm actually really looking forward to the taper week, but I'll let you know how the taper week goes next week. But it does start today, so I'm really looking forward to that. Taper week is designed so that you can rest a little bit and get a lot of the inflammation out of your body so that when you get to race day, you're ready to go. And sometimes people experience sickness and they don't feel so great through taper week. And that's because your body is literally processing all of the kind of like inflammation and things. It's adapting, it's recovering. So it's an important process for getting ready for a race day. So that starts this week and I'm excited for it. The training last week it was interesting because my FTP on Zwift had gone up by several points. So when I got back before I left for my coaching weekend, so on Wednesday I had this massive strength hour of being on the bike, and I had forgotten that the FTP had gone up. So my legs were still a little bit like wobbly and trying to figure themselves out after the coaching weekend. And then I get onto the bike and it's much harder than they have been previously. And I thought, this is this is fun. So made it through that, had some good swims this week, had some good runs this week. Well, yeah, I did have a couple of good runs this week. And then on Friday, I had a great bike. On Saturday, had a not so great run, but there were other factors that were involved in that one. And then Sunday, it's been raining a lot. I got rained on the bike, but it turned out to be a good, solid last week of training. I'm feeling so good about where my training is. I know that I've expressed this concern a few times on the podcast, but and I was talking to my coach about it last weekend, but one of my like biggest concerns is not being prepared for this Ironman. And it's partially rooted in the fact that even though for several other ones I have somewhat tried, to get ready to go and to train for these races, I've never actually really had specific triathlon training and coaching. And I know, my logical brain is like, we're definitely prepared. We've worked for this, over a year now. This has been really, really good training, really, really good coaching. You're ready to go. But then there's the other part of me that's like, like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. Like, I just know some of my concerns about being like the run, for example, and we can talk a little bit more about that next week as I get ready to go. But, we're 2 weeks out basically from Coeur D'Alene and from the race. So it's just the countdown really. And it's just managing a little bit of that excitement. Like I'm really excited and ready to get this done because I've just been looking forward to it for so long, but also the nerves of knowing what I'm about to face. And it's a hefty day. So we'll see how it goes, but managing expectations for sure. And just trying to keep my head about me since there's a lot to think about and there's a lot to keep track of. So training has been going well. We're entering into taper week. And then the other thing that you really want to focus on too, when you get into taper week, is to focus on rest, focus on resting, focus on staying hydrated. That's going to be a really big key factor. And then really good, solid nutrition, lots of really good protein, lots of good vegetables and a wide variety of different types of foods and some good carbohydrates so that you're continuing to replenish those glycogen stores, which we're actually going to talk about today because we're going to talk about two common issues that runners deal with. And I have a tendency to deal with side stitches. And I actually have a previous share or personal story to talk about. And then we're also going to talk about bonking, just because they're fairly common issues and they're really easy to avoid and deal with. And you can catch the signs of them very quickly. And it's something that's really important to keep in mind. So we haven't really talked a whole lot about running. So hopefully we'll get some helpful things in here for you. So what is a side stitch? A side stitch is a pain that you usually feel on one side of your abdomen. And the more sciencey name for it is, it's called exercise related transient abdominal pain, ERTAP. Really what it feels like is either a cramp or an ache. Usually you'll feel them like kind of underneath your ribs almost, or kind of like around that area, but they can be a little bit lower as well. Usually they're not too bad and they're just kind of nagging issues, but sometimes they can be quite sharp and potentially feel like somebody's stabbing you. It depends on the range of how bad it is. Side stitches happen because, we actually don't entirely know why, but there are some theories as to why side stitches happen. So I'm gonna stick with the ones that usually make the most, or that tend to make the most sense to me. But so muscle spasms is one of the main reasons that they think side stitches happen. It's either a muscle spasm in the diaphragm or it's a muscle spasm close to the diaphragm. It's one of the muscles that is helping to affect the diaphragm. And part of the reason why it happens is because it's a lack of oxygen getting to a certain part of the muscle that's there. So usually the cause of it is shallow or chest breathing, right? You've maybe been going a little bit too hard if you've been running and you're doing a lot of heavy breathing. So that can cause a side stitch. The other potential possibility is that it could be nerve pain. You can still get a side stitch during swimming. So I'm not sure if it necessarily has much to do with the spine, but there are a lot of different types of nerves. And there's one in particular called the peritoneal nerve that it innervates, or it gives you feeling around the abdominal cavity. So the lining of what contains all of your organs in your abdomen. And so it's possible that part of why we get a side stitch is it could be affecting one of those little nerves that kind of go to that area. But I think for most people, it makes the most sense that it has something to do with muscles and them not getting enough oxygen. If you're breathing too hard, and then the more fatigued that you become, the more likely a side stitch could occur. That's usually when it seems to happen the most. And most of the time too, it usually happens because of those short breaths. And it's just a lot of that added stress on the muscles around the diaphragm. So it happens to me often. And my personal short story with this one is when I was younger and playing, I think we were playing basketball. But I remember getting side stitches all the time when I was younger, just when we were trying to either, summer had happened and we were getting back into volleyball season. And so they were making us run, miles and stuff like that. And I just remember getting side stitches. And one time I was going to get water and there was a coach around and I was like, I just don't understand. Like, why do I keep getting these side stitches? It's like, it's really, really annoying. And the interesting thing about that too, is that it wasn't usually during long endurance events either. It was like sprints and stuff like that, which makes sense in some ways, right? That my diaphragm would have been breathing so hard during sprints that I would get a side stitch. And I was fairly untrained as well, but I had a coach that talked to me. This is definitely a tangent, but I'm going to go there anyway. I had a coach, that basically said back to me, there's always going to be something, right, when it comes to sport. And I appreciate that. I think it gave me a different perspective on, especially endurance sports. Like, things don't usually go 100% right? Like, I think with endurance sports, and the reason why sometimes I get so nervous going into them is that I know that things don't go right, and I can't always know exactly what's not going to go right, but it's a day of managing choices and decisions all day long. So, you're focusing on your hydration, you're focusing on your fueling, but there's things like tires blowing out. There's things like, I don't know, getting side stitches or not fueling properly or dealing with the heat or the wind or dealing with different changes in weather. And potentially if you're at elevation as well, you're dealing with the symptoms of that, especially if you're not well adapted. So there's so many different things that can just be wonky, or heck, you're driving down you're riding down a bumpy road and, your water bottles with all of your stuff and all your fueling goes. And now you've got to punt with what they have on the course, right? There's so many different things that happen, or getting to the end of the run and the stations are kind of running out of all of the things because you're a little bit later than the crew that was going, the massive crew that's ahead of you, right? Oh man, there's just so many different things that can happen in these events. So I appreciate the fact that like this coach said, that perspective of there's always going to be something that's just not quite right with sport. Like it's very common that you're either not going to feel ready for the day. Like his intention in his comment was, you just got to do it, right? You just got to get through it. You just got to push through it. But on the flip side, for me now, there are a lot of reasons for why certain things happen in the body, right? Like an easy answer for a side stitch would have been, hey, then what you need to do is you need to focus on your breathing, and you probably need to work a little bit harder on your fitness so that when you get to coaching days, then, you're a little bit more prepared. There's so many different answers for that, right? But so I kind of had this love-hate relationship with that comment, but it just, every time I get a side stitch, I'm reminded of that story. So it's just that there's always something, right? But let's talk about a few ways that you can avoid side stitches, or if they start to come up when you're running, here's what you can do. So one of the ways to avoid it is if you are running too far, too fast, before your body has really been able to adjust, it can lead to a side stitch. So one thing you want to do is slow down and focus on breathing calmly if you're getting a side stitch. But one of the things too, like especially if you're getting off the bike and your body is trying to adjust, which if you have not done a triathlon, you'll eventually experience what that feels like. Running on tired legs is not the easiest thing to do. So one of the things you have to do is focus and calm down, stay cognizant and focused on form, focus on things you can control, focus on breathing, things like that, and try to get into a pace that's not too fast, but it's just a good solid pace for you. And you can push the pace later, but it's important to focus on fueling, hydration, and just getting your body adjusted from the bike to the run. So slow down, focus on breathing calmly. If you do get a side stitch, slow down. I mean, those are the biggest things, because you need to calm your breathing down. Remember, a lot of things that cause side stitches are things like breathing too short, too fast, right? Short breaths just puts a lot of stress on the diaphragm, on the muscles around that control the diaphragm, as well as not getting enough oxygen to your system. Another one is also remember that breathing while running is part of good form. So being able to control your breathing and core muscles can help you run farther, faster as well. And it's very, very common for women in particular not to have very good core strength, which is something that needs to be worked on for sure. So making sure that you're able to control your breathing is important. One of the things I see a lot in my practice, and we work a lot with core breathing, as well as just core strength, is that it's so common for people in general, this is across the board of all the people, not just women, that in general, they tend to lack control of their breathing, just like laying down or sitting, let alone trying to now coordinate breathing and proper breathing and good breathing form with walking, which is where usually it all just falls apart. And then you ask your body to go run 26 plus miles. And that's where some of these injuries really start up, because you never really have established really good core breathing and diaphragmatic breathing with gait. So one of the things I do with rehab with some of my patients is we start with them laying on their back, and then we teach them how to breathe, with belly breathing. And then we transition that into using your core. So doing something like a dead bug, but also focusing on breathing at the same time. And then we work through gait with making sure that they're able to breathe as well. And then that slowly transitions into the run. So those are just some things that you can practice. And because that way too, if you do get a side stitch, for example, then I need to slow down and I need to focus on my breathing, and I need to make sure that I'm breathing through my abdomen properly, right? Using that diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing. So that's one way. Those are a couple things about side stitches, just things to remember if you do get them, what to do if they start and how to potentially avoid them, and some things you can work on with that diaphragmatic breathing and things like that. Now, of course, also the other piece of it is still working on like over time, right? You build up, you become faster, you become a more efficient runner, all sorts of stuff like that. So that is usually just time and training and continuing to get more comfortable at those faster speeds. But if you are somewhere in the middle between there and you're trying to push it a little bit harder, just understanding if you do get a side stitch, you need to slow down and slow down your breathing. Okay, well, keep listening because we will be right back with more right after this. Okay, so bonking. This is the second half of this podcast episode. So, what is bonking? This is the other thing that gets talked about fairly often, but I don't think we've ever talked about it on this podcast yet. So, bonking is when you get so fatigued during a workout that you basically kind of like hit a wall. It can be pretty sudden. It can be a little bit overwhelming because it usually happens during endurance events, and it tends to happen pretty quickly. It feels like you just don't have any energy possibly left. Why does this happen? Well, it happens because basically what you've done over this, endurance event is created glycogen depletion from both the muscles and the liver. Now, we've talked about this in previous episodes when we've talked about carbohydrates and fueling and all sorts of stuff like that, that part of what we need to do as far as recovery and also making sure that we're taking in carbohydrates while we're, going through our endurance events is because your body will use up the glycogen from the muscles first, right? We usually have about an hour's worth of glycogen built up in our muscles, and then it will go to the liver. And then once those are all gone, if nothing has been coming in through food and fueling, and then it will use up whatever is left in the blood. And then you're just kind of waiting until the body's like, I can't do it anymore. I have no fuel to go. So there's to keep those things in mind. This is part of why we want to make sure that we train with fuel, and then we're recovering afterwards, and we're still, making sure we're getting enough food. And this is also why you don't necessarily want to load carbohydrates in a ton like the night before your race, but just to keep carbohydrates a little bit on the higher side as you go through your taper week, so that you can continue to have those floating through as you go through and you get ready for that race. Just make sure that all of those stores are topped off. The other thing to remember too, and this is specifically for women, is remember if you haven't heard this before, you can go back to previous episodes in this podcast. But as you go through your cycle, it depends on where you are, right? So if you are in that first phase, which is the follicular phase, if you are, I've been getting those mixed up recently, so I'm making sure that I'm getting that one correct. But that first phase, which is that period to ovulation, that's the time when you don't necessarily need quite as many carbohydrates. Your body tends to use them pretty well, and it can access those stores really well, which I just talked about, right, in your muscles and in your liver. But if you're in that luteal phase, so on the other side of ovulation, and you're leading up to getting your period, so this is a time where your body tends to spare carbohydrate, right? So it actually doesn't access the muscle and liver stores of glycogen as easily, which is why it's usually recommended that women eat, so women who are menstruating, if you're in that cycle phase of life, that's when you want to be getting maybe a little bit higher on the carbohydrate side of things, so that you have more passing through your bloodstream, so your body has access to it. So just keep that in mind. There's a little bit of a gender difference there if you're a reproductive female. So there's just some things to keep in mind depending on where you are in your cycle. But remember that glycogen is essentially the way that you store sugar. It's the primary fuel source that athletes use. Although there's another one just to keep in mind, that women do tend to use fatty acids a little bit better during endurance events and races and things like that than men. It's a weird thing, but usually you're going to be using more carbohydrate and glycogen than fatty acids necessarily, but that's why you want to keep them there and know where you are in your cycle. And that's an additional way to avoid bonking, right? So for, especially if you are in that luteal phase, making sure that you have access is one very solid way. Access to carbohydrates is a very solid way to make sure that you don't end up bonking on the latter side of your event. So that's what it is. That's why it happens. What are a few ways to avoid it, which I've kind of started hinting at anyway, but carbohydrate intake definitely matters when it comes to long endurance races. Make sure you're getting in enough carbohydrates is the first and foremost, most important point. And if you are a female that is menstruating, then that is a very good part to remember that where you are in your cycle does matter. So keeping in mind that you are going to need a little bit more carbohydrate, especially if you're in that second phase of your cycle. If you are a non-menstruating female, if you are more towards the perimenopause or post-menopause side of things, then carbohydrates are going to vary a little bit as far as your need. You're going to it's best to know how well your body functions with carbohydrates. And usually what ends up happening is having a more well-rounded fueling source is better. So having something with a little bit of protein, fat, and carbohydrate is a good balance across the board. You'll be able to use that a little bit better than just straight up sugar. Also, another ways to avoid bonking is to make sure that you don't undereat. This is more about preparation for those big events. You don't want to go in fatigued and underfueled. So eating enough is really, really important. It's, again, as I mentioned, it's how you make sure that you store all these things up so that on race day, you have access to them. You really don't want to go in underfueled. So make sure you eat really good, solid food. You want to make sure there's lots of vegetables and lots of really good quality protein and good carbohydrate sources. The other thing to remember too is that this is part of where recovery is really important. You need to remember that after your training, your recovery is where you are replenishing, again, all of those stores, and you're getting ready for tomorrow's training, right? So you don't just want to make sure you're getting protein afterwards. We'll still go back to the 30 grams of protein 30 minutes after your workout, or a little bit higher if you're on the postmenopausal stage, and you could actually spread that out a little bit more around your training. But you also want to make sure that you're getting at least a meal in with a good carbohydrate source and a good whole food protein source, and maybe a vegetable after your workout, at least within an hour and a half of finishing that up. That way you're getting that fuel in so that your body can, again, replenish, rebuild, get ready to go. The other thing you want to make sure of too, and you'll see this, being in the nutrition world, I see all the different types of articles, and I'm constantly looking for just different things. And it's very common for me to see, do you fuel during training? Do you not? Do you practice your race day training during training, or do you not? Or race day fueling during training, or do you not? One of the things you want to do is just make sure that when you are training, that you're using some type of fuel source that will translate into the race, right? So usually what you'll find and what you'll hear is that you want to be using the same kind of type of fuel source so that you can get your body used to it. This is how people get used to fueling a little bit better off of things like maltodextrin or other things that can kind of be hard for the body to get used to, or just training your body to get fuel from whole food. Yes, when you do use whole food for your fuel source, it does require a little bit more energy to be expended to break that down and digest it so that you can have it. But it's better than getting to the end of your race or midway through your race and having GI cramping because your body can't handle maltodextrin or the amount of fructose that's going in through your body, right? So it's really, really important to practice your fueling during training that you would be using for racing, but also noting that this is how you train your body to use that fuel. So whatever fuel source you're going to use, your body needs to know what to expect. And that's part of the reason behind that. The other one is to watch your speed when it comes to bonking, which I thought is really interesting. So I learned this actually from a friend of mine. And one thing, and I was actually on a podcast. I was a guest for her podcast, and she asked me about bonking, and I said all these different reasons. And she goes, also, one thing she's noticed is that if an athlete was pushing a little bit too hard for too long beyond where they were in training, even with proper nutrition and fueling, bonking was a little bit more common in those athletes. So if you are training at a certain pace and that's kind of where you're at, you'll want to monitor yourself day of, because it can be very exciting, lots of adrenaline, and there's so many things going on and it's so exciting, but you may need to just monitor yourself a little bit and just make sure that the pace that you're running is one that you can sustain. And as long as you can do that and it's a good, solid, comfortable pace, then you're good. But if it's a little bit faster, maybe like a lot bit faster than what you've usually been training at, you might want to be a little bit careful, just because, especially for, let's say, 26 miles, that could lead to quite a bit of fatigue and potentially bonking at the end of the race. So watch your pace, watch your consumption of fuel and hydration. And especially if it's a hot day, focus on hydration, focus on, things that help you to manage that heat and to delay dehydration. That's going to be really important too. So that's our episode for now. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels, and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think might love it. You can also follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram. And you can also find me at drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com, or come over and leave a message with either of us, Wisp Sports or me at Dr. Kirstin. We would be happy to chat with you. So thank you for listening. And I will be back next week, which is 1 week from when the Ironman will begin. So it'll be an exciting episode. And I'm looking forward to talking all about what I'm going to be doing, what I've decided on as far as fueling and hydration, and what all of my strategies are. And we'll talk about race day prep. So I will see you then. Take care.